The bustling terminal of JFK Airport hummed with its usual morning energy as passengers rushed to their gates, dragging wheeled luggage across polished floors. Among them walked Marie Chen, her navy blue Delta Airlines uniform crisp and neat despite having already completed 2 early morning flights. With her hair pulled back in a neat bun and her golden wings pin gleaming on her lapel, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from 15 years of working in the skies. Flight DL 285 to Los Angeles was supposed to be just another day at work for Marie. She'd done this route countless times, serving passengers with the same genuine smile that had earned her multiple customer service awards over the years. The morning light streamed through the massive terminal windows as she made her way to the pre-flight crew briefing, stopping briefly to help an elderly passenger who had dropped their boarding pass. "Good morning, everyone." Marie greeted her fellow crew members in the staff room, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. They discussed the day's flight details: a full first-class cabin, 2 passengers requiring special assistance, and clear weather all the way to LA. Everything pointed to a smooth 6-hour journey across the country. As Marie walked through the jet bridge for her pre-flight checks, she thought about the little things that made her love her job: the joy of helping nervous first-time flyers feel at ease, the stories shared with interesting passengers, and even the small adventures of dealing with unexpected situations. She'd handled everything from medical emergencies to marriage proposals in the sky, each experience adding to her expertise. The first-class cabin sparkled under the morning sun filtering through the windows. Marie methodically checked each seat pocket, ensuring everything was in perfect order. She took pride in these small details: the perfectly aligned magazines, the fresh headphone packages, the spotless surfaces. These weren't just tasks to her. They were part of creating an experience for her passengers. The cabin crew worked together like a well-oiled machine, each person knowing their role perfectly. They exchanged quick smiles and professional nods as they prepared for boarding. Marie could hear the growing murmur of passengers gathering at the gate, a sound she'd grown familiar with over the years. "Cabin crew, prepare for boarding," crackled the intercom, and Marie took her position near the aircraft door. She straightened her name tag one last time, took a deep breath, and prepared to welcome the first passengers aboard. The morning sun caught the silver Delta logo on the wall behind her, making it shimmer slightly. What Marie didn't know as she stood there, greeting each passenger with a warm smile, was that this flight would be different from any other in her career. In just a few minutes, an incident would unfold that would test her professionalism, patience, and strength in ways she never expected. But for now, she continued doing what she did best: making every passenger feel welcome as they stepped onto her aircraft. She noticed the usual mix of passengers: business travelers tapping away at their phones, families juggling carry-ons and excited children, and solo travelers already dreaming of their window seat naps. Each one received the same genuine welcome from Marie, her eyes crinkling with warmth above her smile. This was more than just a job to her. It was about creating moments of connection, no matter how brief. The familiar sounds and sensations of a boarding aircraft surrounded her: the soft thud of bags being stored in overhead bins, the quiet conversations between passengers finding their seats, the gentle hum of the aircraft's systems coming to life. Everything felt normal, routine, perfect even. But sometimes, Marie knew from experience, it was these most ordinary moments that held the potential for extraordinary events. The sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against the airplane floor drew attention as Robert Thompson made his way down the first-class aisle. Everything about him screamed wealth and importance. From his perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, to his gleaming designer watch catching the cabin lights. His phone was pressed firmly against his ear, his voice carrying through the cabin as he discussed what seemed to be a major business deal. "No, tell them the meeting can't wait until next week," he barked into his phone, completely ignoring the other passengers settling into their seats. "I don't care about their schedule. This is a $50 million deal we're talking about. He dropped heavily into his seat, 2A, without even a glance at the flight attendant who politely gestured toward his still-fastened seatbelt. Marie approached his seat with her usual professional smile, holding a tray of pre-flight beverages. "Good morning, sir. Would you like to try our—" She was cut off mid-sentence as Thompson held up his hand dismissively, turning his shoulder toward the window while continuing his loud conversation. Other passengers in first class started exchanging uncomfortable glances. A young woman in 2C pulled out her earbuds, watching the scene unfold with growing concern. An older gentleman in 3 lowered his newspaper, his eyebrows furrowing at Thompson's behavior. "I'll return in a moment," Marie said quietly, moving on to serve other passengers. Her smile never wavered, though something flickered in her eyes, not anger or hurt, but the kind of patience that comes from years of dealing with all types of people. Thompson's voice grew louder as his phone call continued, despite the cabin crew's announcement about electronic devices needing to be switched off for takeoff. "Listen, James, these people can wait a few minutes. I'm stuck on this plane and—" Marie returned to his seat, this time with a gentle but firm approach. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're preparing for takeoff. For safety reasons, all phones need to be turned off at this time." Finally, Thompson lowered his phone slightly, turning to look at Marie for the first time. His expression shifted from annoyance to something darker, more condescending. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop several degrees as other passengers held their breath, sensing the tension building. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice dripping with self-importance. "I'm in the middle of a crucial business call. Surely you can make an exception." He looked around the cabin as if expecting other passengers to support him, but was met with stony silence. The young woman in 2C had now pulled out her phone, discreetly pointing it toward the unfolding scene. A couple in row 4 whispered to each other, their disapproving looks aimed at Thompson's behavior. Marie maintained her composure, her voice steady and professional. "Sir, this is a federal aviation safety regulation that applies to all passengers, regardless of status. I'll need you to end your call and switch off your phone before we can proceed with takeoff." Thompson's face flushed red. He pulled the phone slightly away from his ear, his eyes narrowing. "Listen here," he began, his voice taking on an edge that made nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I've been flying first class probably longer than you've been alive. I don't need some—" He paused, his eyes deliberately moving from Marie's face to her name tag and back, his lip curling slightly. The tension in the cabin was now palpable. A businessman in row 5 had removed his sleep mask, sitting up straighter. The older gentleman with the newspaper had fully set it aside now, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. What started as a routine pre-flight interaction was about to become something much more significant, and everyone in the first-class cabin could feel it. The first-class cabin fell into a tense silence as Thompson's words hung in the air. He wasn't done yet. Still clutching his phone, he shifted in his leather seat and continued, his voice getting louder with each word. "I don't think you understand how things work up here in first class. Maybe you're used to serving in the back of the plane, but here we expect a certain level of, well, let's say sophistication." Several passengers gasped quietly. The young woman in 2C had stopped pretending to look at her phone and was now openly recording the incident. The businessman across the aisle slowly closed his laptop, his attention fully focused on the unfolding situation. Marie stood perfectly still, her hands clasped professionally in front of her uniform. The overhead lights caught the silver wings pinned on her lapel, a symbol of her years of dedicated service. When she spoke, her voice remained steady and clear, though slightly quieter than before. "Sir, I understand you're in the middle of an important call. However, safety regulations apply to everyone on this aircraft, regardless of their seat assignment." Thompson let out a harsh laugh, finally ending his call with a sharp, "I'll call you back." He turned fully toward Marie, his expensive watch glinting as he gestured dismissively. "You know what? I'd like to speak to your supervisor. Better yet, get me someone more qualified to handle first class. I'm sure there must be someone more suitable for this section of the plane." The implications in his tone were impossible to miss. A middle-aged woman in row 3 covered her mouth in shock. The older gentleman who had been reading his newspaper earlier was now gripping his armrests so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "I can't believe what I'm hearing," muttered the young professional in 4B, just loud enough for those around him to hear. Others nodded in agreement, their faces showing a mix of disgust and disbelief at Thompson's behavior. Marie took a small breath, her professionalism never wavering. "Sir, I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft. If you have concerns about our safety procedures, I'd be happy to explain them in detail. However, I need to be clear, discriminatory behavior of any kind is not tolerated on our flights." Thompson's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Discriminatory? How dare you suggest?" He unbuckled his seatbelt and started to stand up, his expensive suit jacket pulling slightly at the buttons from the sudden movement. The tension in the cabin reached a breaking point. 2 rows behind, a well-dressed woman in her 40s spoke up, her voice clear and firm. "Sir, we all heard exactly what you were implying. It's completely unacceptable." "Absolutely shameful," agreed another passenger, shaking his head in disappointment. Marie maintained her composure, though a slight tremor in her hands betrayed her emotional state. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but this was different. This was the kind of moment that could define a person's career or change an entire workplace culture. "Jennifer," she called quietly to her colleague at the back of the first-class cabin, "could you please inform the captain about our current situation?" Her voice was professional but firm, making it clear she wasn't asking for permission. She was taking action. Thompson's eyes widened as he realized the situation was slipping out of his control. He looked around the cabin, perhaps for the first time, noticing the numerous phones recording the incident, the disapproving faces, the shared looks of solidarity among the other passengers. His expression shifted from anger to something else, perhaps the first flicker of understanding that his actions would have consequences. "You can't be serious," he sputtered, but his voice had lost some of its earlier arrogance. "Do you know how much I paid for this ticket?" "Sir," Marie replied, her voice now carrying a quiet authority that filled the cabin, "the price of your ticket doesn't buy you the right to disrespect any member of our crew. Now, please return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt, or we'll need to take further action." The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. What started as one man's display of entitlement had become a moment of collective stand against discrimination, with Marie's quiet dignity at its center. From his seat in 3B, Thomas Wong watched the entire scene unfold with growing concern. As a civil rights attorney with 20 years of experience, he'd seen discrimination take many forms, but witnessing it firsthand on an airplane was different. He quietly pulled out his phone and began documenting everything, knowing how important clear evidence could be in situations like this. "Absolutely unacceptable behavior," he whispered to his seatmate, who nodded vigorously in agreement. The young woman who had been recording since the beginning of the incident caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were witnesses to something that needed to be documented. Around the cabin, more phones had emerged from pockets and purses. The soft glow of recording lights dotted the first-class section like tiny stars. A grandmother in 4C was typing rapidly on her phone, her face set in determination. "My daughter works for the local news," she mentioned to anyone within earshot. "This kind of behavior needs to be exposed." Thompson seemed to deflate slightly as he realized just how many people were recording his actions. His expensive suit suddenly seemed to hang a bit looser on his frame as he glanced around nervously. The confidence that had fueled his earlier outburst was quickly being replaced by something that looked a lot like worry. "I think you're all misunderstanding." He tried to backtrack, his voice notably softer than before. I simply meant that I needed someone more experienced with first-class service. Even as he said it, several passengers shook their heads in disbelief. A businessman who had been quietly observing everything finally spoke up. "We all heard exactly what you meant, sir. I fly this route twice a month, and Marie is one of the most professional flight attendants I've ever encountered. Your behavior is embarrassing." The solidarity among the passengers was palpable. A young tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, who had been working on his laptop, removed his headphones and addressed Thompson directly. "You know, I've got about 50,000 followers on Twitter. I wonder how they'd react to this video." Marie had stepped back slightly, maintaining her professional demeanor while her colleague returned from the cockpit with news. The other flight attendant whispered something in her ear, and Marie nodded, her expression remaining calm and collected. Thomas Wong noticed something interesting happening in the cabin, a sort of silent communication between passengers. People were exchanging glances, nodding to each other, sending a clear message. We're not going to sit quietly and let this happen. It reminded him of other moments in history when ordinary people decided to stand up against injustice. A middle-aged woman in designer clothes spoke up from her seat near the window. "I serve on the board of several major companies," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "I can tell you right now, this kind of behavior would not be tolerated in any of our boardrooms, and it shouldn't be tolerated here." The atmosphere in the cabin had completely transformed. What started as one man's discriminatory outburst had turned into a moment of unexpected unity among strangers. Even those who usually preferred to mind their own business found themselves drawn into this impromptu community of support. Through it all, Marie maintained her composure, though those paying close attention might have noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her uniform cuff. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but never had she experienced such overwhelming support from other travelers. Thompson's phone buzzed in his hand, the same phone he refused to turn off earlier. As he glanced at the screen, his face paled slightly. Perhaps it was already too late to contain the situation. In the age of social media, news traveled faster than any airplane. The cabin settled into a tense quiet, broken only by the occasional whisper and the soft sounds of phones capturing every moment. Everyone knew they weren't just witnesses anymore. They were part of something bigger, a moment that would likely extend far beyond this flight. Marie stepped forward with quiet confidence, her years of experience guiding her actions. The entire first-class cabin watched as she addressed Thompson, her voice clear and professional. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, discriminatory behavior violates our airline's policies. I need to inform you that several passengers have expressed concerns about your conduct." The young tech professional in row 4 was already typing furiously on his phone. "This is going viral," he whispered to his seatmate. "My first tweet about this already has hundreds of retweets, and it's only been up for 2 minutes." Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his expensive seat, his earlier arrogance replaced by growing unease. He glanced at his own phone, which was lighting up with notifications. Someone had already identified him. His company, his position. Everything was spreading across social media like wildfire. "Listen," he said, his voice notably softer now. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to some understanding." He attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. The same man who minutes ago had been making discriminatory remarks was now trying to backpedal. A gentle-looking elderly woman in the second row spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "Young man, in my 70 years, I've learned that some things can't be undone with a simple apology. What you said reflects something deeper, and we all heard it." Marie continued handling the situation with remarkable grace. She signaled to her colleague, who returned moments later with a form. "I'm documenting this incident for our flight records," she explained calmly. "Several passengers have offered to provide statements about what occurred." The civil rights attorney, Thomas Wong, reached for his business card. "I'd be happy to provide a formal statement," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. What we witnessed here was a clear case of discrimination in a place of public accommodation. Other passengers began volunteering their contact information. The businesswoman who'd mentioned serving on corporate boards was already drafting an email to the airline's customer service department from her iPad. The grandmother who knew someone in the media was texting furiously, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Thompson's face had lost its red anger, replaced by an ashen pallor. He watched as more and more passengers spoke up, offering their accounts of what happened. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. "My daughter works in HR for a Fortune 500 company," shared a man in a polo shirt. "She always says the biggest mistake people make is thinking their behavior won't have consequences in today's connected world." Marie maintained her professional demeanor, but there was a subtle strength in her posture now. She wasn't just handling a difficult passenger anymore. She was standing up for something bigger, supported by a plane full of strangers who had become unexpected allies. "Sir," she addressed Thompson one more time, "I want you to know that I take no pleasure in documenting this incident. However, every passenger on this aircraft deserves to be treated with respect, including the crew members." A young student who had been quietly observing everything spoke up. "You know what's amazing? How you handled this with such grace. That's real class, not the kind you pay for with an expensive ticket, but the kind you carry inside." The support in the cabin was almost tangible now. Passengers who had never spoken to each other were exchanging understanding looks and supportive nods. What had started as an ugly display of prejudice had transformed into a powerful moment of unity. Thompson sat in silence, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. The weight of his actions seemed to physically press him down into his first-class seat, which suddenly didn't feel quite so privileged anymore. He watched as Marie continued her duties, greeting other passengers with the same warm professionalism she'd shown before his outburst. The incident was winding down, but everyone in the cabin knew this wasn't the end. In an age where actions have instant consequences and words can travel across the globe in seconds, Thompson's behavior would likely follow him long after this flight ended. The cabin intercom crackled to life with the captain's voice, calm but authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the delay, but we need to handle a situation before takeoff. Please remain seated while we sort this out." Marie's colleague returned from the cockpit with a serious expression. She leaned in close and whispered something in Marie's ear. The other passengers watched intently, the cabin so quiet you could hear the gentle hum of the aircraft's auxiliary powered unit. "I have 20 years of flying experience." The captain's voice came through the intercom again. "My priority is ensuring everyone on this aircraft feels safe and respected. After reviewing the situation and speaking with several crew members, I've made my decision." Thompson's face turned pale as two airport security officers appeared at the front of the first-class cabin. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions professional but firm. The lead officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "I didn't mean," Thompson started to say, but the businesswoman in row 3 cut him off. "We all know exactly what you meant, sir. Sometimes our true character shows in moments of frustration." The security officers approached Thompson's seat with measured steps. "Sir, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us," the lead officer stated firmly. His voice was professional, leaving no room for argument. Thompson looked around desperately, perhaps hoping to find a sympathetic face among the passengers. Instead, he saw phones still recording, disapproving looks, and people shaking their heads. His expensive suit seemed to shrink around him as he slowly stood up. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, reaching for his carry-on bag in the overhead bin. "Do you know how much business your airline will lose over this?" His threats sounded hollow now, lacking the confidence from earlier. A young professional in a tech company t-shirt spoke up. "Actually, sir, I think the airline's business will probably improve after people see how they handled this situation. My tweet about this has already been shared thousands of times." As Thompson gathered his things, the elderly woman who had spoken earlier added softly, "Sometimes the most expensive lessons in life don't cost a dime, young man. I hope you learn from this." The security officers waited patiently as Thompson collected his belongings. His movements were stiff, mechanical, like someone walking through a bad dream they couldn't wake up from. His designer briefcase caught on the seat as he pulled it out, a small but noticeable crack in his formerly perfect facade. Marie stood professionally at her station, maintaining her composure as Thompson was escorted past her. She didn't smile or gloat. Her dignity remained intact, a stark contrast to his earlier behavior. For those wondering, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "We'll have a slight delay while we handle some paperwork, but we should be on our way shortly. Thank you for your patience and understanding." As Thompson disappeared down the jet bridge with the security officers, a subtle wave of relief swept through the cabin. Several passengers nodded approvingly, while others began sharing their recordings with each other. "That's what I call karma," whispered the young student to her seatmate. "Instant karma." The civil rights attorney was still taking notes on his phone. "This is going to be a case study in how not to behave on an airplane." He commented to nobody in particular. "And how a company should handle discrimination." Marie began preparing for departure again, checking seatbelts and tray tables with the same professional care she'd shown before the incident. Several passengers made a point to thank her as she passed, offering words of support and appreciation. The first-class cabin, now minus one passenger, felt different. There was a sense of community that hadn't existed before, created by strangers who had witnessed and stood against an injustice together. As Thompson was escorted off the plane, his expensive leather shoes no longer clicking with confidence, but shuffling against the carpet, the reality of the situation began sinking in. The security officers walked on either side of him, their presence making his walk of shame even more pronounced. Other passengers waiting at the gate pulled out their phones, already aware of what had happened through social media. Back in the first-class cabin, passengers were buzzing with conversation. The tech professional who had been tracking social media cleared his throat. "You won't believe this. The video is trending. News outlets are already picking it up. Hashtag first-class karma is going viral." The corporate executive who had spoken up earlier was checking her own phone. His company's name is being tagged in thousands of posts. Their PR team must be having a meltdown right now. She shook her head, a knowing look in her eyes. In today's world, reputations can change in minutes. Marie moved through the cabin with renewed confidence, though she maintained her professional demeanor. As she checked seat belts and tray tables, passengers reached out to touch her arm or offer kind words. "You handled that beautifully," said the elderly woman, patting Marie's hand. "In my day, we didn't have phones to record these things. People got away with it. Not anymore." The airline's ground staff quickly prepared the necessary paperwork for Thompson's removal. Through the windows, passengers could see him standing at the gate counter, his shoulders slumped, looking nothing like the arrogant man who had boarded minutes earlier. His phone kept buzzing, probably notifications from social media, news alerts, or perhaps his company trying to reach him. "My daughter just texted me," said the grandmother who knew someone in the media. "This story is going to be on the evening news. They're already calling it first-class discrimination backfires." She adjusted her reading glasses with a satisfied smile. The civil rights attorney was having a quiet conversation with two other passengers who had recorded the incident. "Make sure you save those videos," he advised. "They might be important evidence of discriminatory behavior in a public space." A flight attendant from economy class came forward to help prepare for departure. "Word spreading through the whole plane," she whispered to Marie. "The passengers back there are applauding you." Someone even started a positive review campaign for our airline's stance against discrimination. Outside at the gate, Thompson could be seen making frantic phone calls, his free hand gesturing wildly as he tried to explain himself to someone. His designer suit, which had seemed so impressive earlier, now looked like expensive wrapping on a package nobody wanted to open. "You know what's amazing?" said the young student, still watching through the window. "How quickly karma can work these days. One minute, you're feeling all-powerful in your expensive suit. The next minute, you're trending for all the wrong reasons." The captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've completed all necessary documentation regarding the incident. We'll be departing shortly. I want to thank you all for your patience and support our crew members." A round of spontaneous applause broke out in the cabin. Marie looked down, momentarily overwhelmed by the support, but quickly composed herself and continued her duties. A first-class flight attendant for 15 years, she had never experienced anything quite like this. "I think he just got a call from his office," noted a passenger near the window, still watching Thompson at the gate. By the look on his face, it wasn't a pleasant conversation. Indeed, Thompson had gone from gesturing angrily to standing completely still, his phone pressed against his ear, his face growing increasingly pale. The ground staff began preparing for departure, closing the aircraft door with a final thud. As the jet bridge pulled away, passengers could see Thompson standing alone at the gate, his power and privilege stripped away by his own actions, left to face the consequences of his behavior in a world where nothing stays hidden for long. The next morning, news of the incident had spread far beyond the confines of that first-class cabin. Major news networks picked up the story, with headlines reading "Discrimination has no class" and "Airline takes stand against first-class bigotry." The videos, shared thousands of times overnight, painted a clear picture of what happened. The airline's corporate office released a powerful statement. "We stand firmly with our crew member and against any form of discrimination. Every passenger, regardless of their ticket class, deserves respect. We've permanently banned the passenger involved and are reviewing our policies to strengthen our stance against discriminatory behavior." Marie woke up to hundreds of supportive messages from colleagues across the industry. Flight attendants from other airlines shared similar stories, thanking her for taking a stand. "You've given us all courage. Read one message. Your professionalism in the face of discrimination shows what we should all aspire to be." Thompson's investment firm wasn't silent either. By mid-morning, they had released their own statement. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our senior partners. His actions do not reflect our company's values. He has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a thorough investigation." The tech professional who had first shared the video online posted an update. For those asking, yes, this really happened. And yes, the flight attendant handled it with incredible grace. This isn't about canceling someone. It's about standing up against behavior that should have been canceled long ago. Social media continued to buzz with reactions. The elderly woman from the flight appeared in a morning news interview. "I've been flying for over 50 years, she said, her voice steady and clear. "Times have changed. People need to understand that money doesn't buy the right to disrespect others." The civil rights attorney wrote a detailed LinkedIn post analyzing the incident from a legal perspective. What we witnessed wasn't just poor behavior, it was a clear example of discrimination in public accommodation. The airline's swift response sets an important precedent for how companies should handle such situations. By afternoon, several corporate diversity trainers had already incorporated the incident into their teaching materials. "This is a perfect case study," one expert explained on a business news channel. "It shows how quickly reputation damage can occur and why creating an inclusive culture is crucial for modern businesses." The businesswoman who had spoken up during the flight shared her thoughts in a viral post. "In boardrooms, we often discuss company values. But values mean nothing if we don't live them." What I witnessed on that flight wasn't just about one person's behavior, it was about all of us choosing to stand up for what's right. Marie's colleagues surprised her with a small celebration in the crew room before her next flight. Cards, flowers, and supportive notes covered her locker. A veteran pilot stopped by to shake her hand. "You've done more for airline crew respect in one day than many have done in years," he said quietly. The airline's employee newsletter featured a special section about handling discrimination. Without naming names, they used the incident to reinforce their zero-tolerance policy. Flight crews across the country discussed how to handle similar situations professionally. Thompson's world, meanwhile, had turned upside down. His firm's clients began asking questions. Business partners distanced themselves. His carefully crafted image of success and sophistication had crumbled in the face of his true character being exposed. Support for Marie came from unexpected places. A group of regular first-class passengers started a recognition campaign for outstanding flight attendants. Class isn't about where you sit on the plane, their initiative stated. It's about how you treat others. The grandmother who had filmed the incident shared an update with her fellow passengers through social media. My granddaughter's school asked me to come speak about standing up to discrimination. Sometimes the best lessons come from real-life examples. As the day wound down, Marie sat in her apartment, reading through the countless messages of support. Her phone buzzed with another notification. The airline's CEO wanted to meet with her personally to thank her for exemplifying their values in such a challenging moment. 3 months after the incident, the impact of that fateful flight continued to ripple through the airline industry and beyond. Marie sat in a comfortable auditorium chair, surrounded by fellow flight attendants from airlines across the country. She had been invited as the keynote speaker at the annual Flight Attendants Conference. As she stepped up to the podium, she remembered the day that changed everything. The conference room was packed, with over 500 airline professionals eager to hear her story. I never expected a routine flight to turn into such a powerful moment, she began, her voice steady and clear. The changes that followed the incident were remarkable. The airline had completely revamped its passenger conduct policies, making them stronger and clearer. They introduced mandatory respect and inclusion training for all first-class passengers during the booking process, a first in the industry. Our job isn't just about serving drinks or demonstrating safety features, Marie continued, looking out at the sea of faces. It's about maintaining dignity and respect at 35,000 feet. The audience nodded in agreement, many taking notes. Back at the investment firm, Thompson's actions had lasting consequences. After a thorough investigation, he was asked to resign. The firm used the incident to launch a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program, turning their embarrassment into meaningful change. The civil rights attorney who witnessed everything had written a detailed article for a major law journal, using the incident as a case study. Modern discrimination often wears expensive suits, he wrote. But in today's connected world, accountability is just a smartphone away. Marie's story became part of training materials for flight crews worldwide. Airlines began emphasizing that premium service didn't mean tolerating poor behavior. The phrase first-class karma had become industry shorthand for standing up to entitled passengers. The young tech professional's video had accumulated millions of views. More importantly, it sparked a movement. Passengers across the globe began sharing stories of standing up against discrimination, creating a ripple effect of positive change. The most beautiful part, Marie shared with the conference audience, wasn't just what happened that day. It's what happened afterward. She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics of reported discrimination incidents on flights. They had dropped significantly since airlines adopted stronger policies. The grandmother who had witnessed everything started a social media campaign called Respect Has No Class, which gained thousands of followers. She traveled to schools, sharing the story and teaching young people about standing up for what's right. Airlines began featuring anti-discrimination messages in their safety videos. Respect isn't a premium service became a common phrase. First-class lounges displayed clear conduct policies, reminding premium passengers that their tickets bought comfort, not privilege. The businesswoman who spoke up during the incident now included the story in her corporate leadership talks. Real leadership, she would say, is standing up for others, regardless of your position or status. Marie received letters from flight attendants worldwide, sharing their own stories and thanking her for giving them courage. One wrote, You showed us that maintaining professionalism doesn't mean accepting disrespect." As she concluded her conference speech, Marie shared a final thought. "That day taught me something important. Change doesn't always come from big movements or planned actions. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people choosing to do the right thing in a single moment." The audience rose in a standing ovation. In the back of the room, a new flight attendant wiped away tears. "This is why I chose this career," she whispered to her colleague. "Not just to serve, but to stand for something." Marie's story became required reading in airline training programs. New flight attendants learned about the incident not just as a lesson in handling difficult passengers, but as an example of how one person's dignity could inspire industry-wide change. Looking out at the applauding crowd, Marie felt grateful. What started as an ugly moment of discrimination had transformed into a powerful message of hope. It proved that sometimes the most important changes start with one person choosing to stand tall in the face of prejudice.